The title of this bill, which I think is entirely appropriate, which is the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Youth Courts Jurisdiction and Orders Amendment Bill, which covers this bill incredibly well. It says that only those children that commit absolutely terrible, heinous crimes will be seen in the youth court. They can then be sent back to the family court if necessary. So I think the title, the commencement date, fit well with this bill, and I'm happy to speak briefly on that part.
Dr. Rajan Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I speak with some sadness because when I heard Mr. Chester Burrows talking about this particular bill and what it intended to do with young children, I was reminded of my days in practice. And I was reminded of the act under which I worked. It was the Child Welfare Act 1925. And that particular act, under that act, working in South Auckland, which is where I was working with these young children and their families and young people, what we used to do in those days to these young children, after a very small number of reasonably minor offences, they were railroaded, which was a practice of the day. And what we did with those young children, Mr. Chairman, is very much what this bill tries to do to our 12 and 13-year-olds. And the Minister might not recall, I'm sure her officials could inform her about this and show her the research. What we did with these young children, what we sent them to national institutions, and we sent them there for discipline training. There was one place called Hokio, at Hokio Beach in the Horowhenua. Then there was Kohitere, in places like Kingsley and others. They were there and they went through in so-called intense training. At one point, these young children were taken out to Camp Peak. And Camp Peak was the forest that Department of Social Welfare owned on the foothills of the Tararuas there, and which is where they were given this kind of training. Then they were brought back to Kohitere and sent back to South Auckland. And what was supposed to happen was wraparound services around them, which is what we're supposed to provide for them at the time. Within a very short period of time, these young children ended up in youth justice and the criminal justice system. The recidivism rate was over 70%. It was because of that series of experiences, Minister, that the Children, Young Persons, the Families Act was designed. And that took 10 years to design. And because of the work I was doing in those days, I was very involved with that. It took a long time to design that. And that particular act really did set out the major difference between care and protection and youth justice. And my colleagues have read out parts of the act and the purpose behind it. But what this act what this bill does, it really takes us right back to the pre-1974 days. And what does it deliver to is what confuses me. I think it does nothing more than deliver to the punitive agenda of the government. In the election campaign, they talked so much about violence. They did talk about how they will be very strong, they will be punitive, and this is the unpacking of that agenda. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, it's best to stop and rethink that and say, I now find myself in a different place. I now have material that officials put before me, and on the basis of that, I will design a much better, much more effective system. But in fact, this is not what this particular bill does. It actually takes us to someplace else, which is why the title of this bill should actually be Shifting the Age of Criminal Responsibility Bill, because that seems to be its driver, and it is a punitive mindset. It will do again to our 12 and 13-year-olds what the Child Welfare 1925 Act did. And it was all of those kinds of things that was in the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Act that actually does focus on care and protection for this particular age group. Because we are talking about children, and we are talking about care and protection needs, and we do know that the science is there, the opportunity is there, the system is there to actually do better with that particular group than what this bill takes us to. Perhaps, and the people who submitted before the Select Committee made it quite clear that this was a radical shift. And when we asked them, why not give to the family court, Mr. Chairman, the tools they need to focus on the care and protection needs of these young people, but still address the kinds of things. Mr. Chairman.
David Garrett.